city, I've been browsing. Treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 198 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. It is week 14, baby. One more week till we start the fantasy playoffs, till we start the Dynasty playoffs. Nobody I'd rather be chopping it up with my main man, All In Playoff John. How you doing, buddy?
Good to be here. Playoff John coming at you. And yeah, it's it. 1 week left, right? Before the show begins. So I think this is a really important time to dial it in. But not just for everyone in the playoffs. This show is going to help out with everyone that's not in the playoffs and it's got those rookie picks, baby.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that long ago we were talking about rookie fever, John. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
we were talking
that's
about
right. There's cycles.
These 23 classes, you know, and you know, you have the multiple personalities of the podcast host, and I love it.
Disorder, yeah.
And, you know, this year's been an awesome experience. We've launched the Patreon, been a lot more active on Twitter, and I got to read a message I got right before we got on here, and this is why I do this. This is what I absolutely love. But you know, we've always been answering questions. My man Based Dale, that's it, at DaleFan6969. He put, "Hey, bro, I appreciate your help. You've helped me fight my way out of the bottom of the league and avoid a nipple piercing." Yes, that's right, a nipple piercing. In our league, this is awesome. The bottom two teams in the league get to pick captains to have a beer chugging contest. The losers of those teams get a choice of either, John, you ready for this? I'm going to let you choose.
I think I'm ready. Okay.
So choice one is a nipple piercing, and then you need to rock that for a day at the public pool. Or number two is you get to get the darkest available commercial spray pan and sport that for a two-night trip to Nashville. My man Dale missed out on that just from tuning into Smash Accept, checking out what we do. And I absolutely love that. When you guys give that interaction, you know, I really got to give a shout out to Spotify where they put their Wrapped program out there.
Right,
and it shows who's listening to your show and what. And some of you guys have reached out and said, you know, I'm in the top 1% of Smash Accept listeners, and I've listened to 4,000 plus hours of the show. And that, like, John, from when we started like 3 years ago, where it was like me, you, and my mom were listening. That's about it. You know, it's like, dude, it's a really
you gotta be proud of that
experience. And like, guys are, you know, the Patreon's been blowing up and growing exponentially, and those guys are starting to form their own podcasts, and we're going to start, you know, getting into that. But let's get into the real nitty gritty. What we're trying to do here, John, is I know a couple years ago you and I started talking, and when we formed the Smash Leagues, it's like we're going to go no trade deadline. And my thought process has always been the no trade deadline in Dynasty allows you to, you know, the top teams end up having to pay a tax to the bottom teams, and it brings them closer together because, you know, that guy that's got Kyron Williams or that guy that's got James Conner, or, you know, he's got someone on his bench and he's not going to play next year. Now all of a sudden you get that extra tax on there. You start to bring all the top teams pay a little bit more premium, all the bottom teams there, and it just rewards everyone the whole way across the board.
Yeah, I mean, this is a really important topic. If you're a commissioner or, you know, as a league, you should always be looking at how to improve things, which is what I think we've done a nice job with the Smash Leagues. But first of all, I have to tell you, like, just to echo what you said, really, really proud of everything that Smash has built. Really, you, Dad, have really grinded a lot over the last couple of years. And it's really incredible to see just these loyal listeners and how many listeners you've built. And I think you've got 14K followers. And we're helping people win leagues. We're helping people get out of the basement. We're helping them avoid nipple piercings now. So very proud of that. Yeah, that is next level. I never thought we'd get to that point, but that's kind of the pinnacle. And by the way, I think I'm probably just going to go ahead and take the spray tan and just go out at night and just kind of like have my drink in the corner somewhere on Broadway in Nashville.
I think I'm taking the nipple piercing. I am so pale.
Wow.
Right? If I get that tan, that's going to be rough.
You'd never live it down.
It's for a 2-night trip with boys' night out in Nashville. You know, like I just can't do it.
Okay. Well, I feel you on that. But anyway, I think on the trade deadline, before I got into these Smash Leagues, we kind of did have the trade deadlines. But I have to tell you, I do like it a little bit better without a trade deadline. And I think you're right that actually some of the biggest trades that go down are after the playoffs start. And to your point, it can actually benefit the people that are kind of in the bottom half of the league, because those playoff contenders are willing to do things more to go win a ship than they maybe normally would have during the regular season. So it kind of helps with some of the divide in the leagues, if you will. And I think it actually makes them more competitive over time. And it's just also more strategy, right? You really have to kind of be thinking next level about not only what you need to do you need another piece or two, or what are your competitors going to do that are contending against you? And it just creates an even more competitive strategic environment. I love it. So I think everyone should consider it. I mean, there's always, a few kind of views on the other side, and I kind of get it to some degree. But overall, I think that there's more pros than cons in my view.
Yeah, I don't think I'll go back on it. Like I can't go back the other way.
Yeah.
It's some next level thinking. I mean, right now I have the 1 seed. So the 1 seed and the 2 seed, it's like, dude, you get to sit back, right? Like you don't have to do anything in week 14 or 15 if you're already locked in, and just say, hey, let's see what happens. Because a lot of those teams that are going to lose in week 15, they're going to be one of the guys that are going to try to sell, as opposed to just trying to get off those bottom teams. And if you have Jonathan Taylor, if you have Ramondre Stevenson, they're not going to help you in the playoffs. Now's the time to move those kind of guys. Now's the time to, especially at the running back position, John, sell for 90 cents on a dollar, 85 cents on a dollar, because you need that guy. And next year's class, I mean, we're going to talk a lot about the 24s, but it's not a really impressive rookie class. So, I mean, if you can go out there and you can get Jonathan Taylor on the cheap, you can get Ramondre Stevenson on the cheap. If you're not one of those contenders, I mean, how many guys do you see in that 2024 class that are going to come in and, we talked about it last year where there were potential 3 or 4. They might not have been the same 3 or 4 that we're talking about, but I mean, Achane's a certified stud.
Yeah.
Gibbs, Bijan, and some other guys got involved. But I mean, in that next year's class, there might be 1 or 2?
Yeah, I think the weakness of the 24 class is at running back. And you already kind of rattled off, there's at a minimum 3 guys that are head and shoulders, I think, better than anyone in the 24 running back class. Achane, Gibbs, and Bijan. And I am absolutely head over heels in love with Achane. I was too low on him coming out. I'm just blown away by what he's done every time he touches the ball. He got back on the field again, 2 more touchdowns, the yards per carry. Every metric you want to look at are incredible. I'm almost to the point I haven't quite yet put him in the same tier as kind of that Gibbs Bijan range, but he's close for me. I'm probably higher than the market currently on Achane. The only thing that's going to hold that kid back is health. So just staying on the field. But again, that's the case for almost every running back in my view. I do think there's a couple guys that are going to be interesting for next year. Trevion Henderson from Ohio State, I've talked about a couple times on the show. He's been my cover-to-cover RB1 coming out of Ohio State. Really incredible size-speed ratio. And that's maybe the one advantage he has over Gibbs and Achane. He could have a bigger workload. We need to see him land in a position where we're convinced, he would have like an every down type of workload. The other guy, though, that I've kind of had as my RB2 for a while now is Trey Benson out of Florida State.
I like that.
And pour one out for Florida State and what happened there with the college football playoffs. But he's a dual threat. He's got speed for days. And I think that's what the NFL is looking for right now. Very dynamic type of guy. And so those 2 guys may slot in, if we were kind of combining those 2 classes, in at maybe 4 and 5 for me. I still love Tyjae Spears, as you know.
Yeah.
I think that he's somewhere in that same type of tier. I think that Zach Charbonnet still has some potential as well. But those are really the 2 couple. There's a few other guys that I like in this 24 running back class, but I think most of them are going to be going in the second round of rookie drafts. Just kind of waiting for draft capital and landing spot. But Blake Corum out of Michigan, Bucky Irving out of Oregon, Braylon Allen just declared out of Wisconsin. He's a pretty interesting candidate as well. And then I like Marshawn Lloyd out of USC. That's my next wave of guys. But again, I'm putting those guys further down, like a tier or two down below the guys we just talked about.
Yeah, I think this is the time of year where I start to think, what were some of the pitfalls? What did we think about, and I know when we were in 2022, John, we were talking about 2023 is going to be a beast class. You and I said that from the beginning. That's why we did those punts. That's why we set up those things. I know you don't love yours. I love mine. And I ended up selling. I couldn't do it either. I ended up trading JSN. I traded, Flowers. I traded a bunch of guys, but it's just about the fun.
I learned a lot. That's for sure. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think we try to do that every year. And last year we were like, oh, well, this class isn't that special. I mean, what do you got to do? You got to settle for at 111, maybe Devin Achane, and like 201, Sam Laporta. And, you start to get into these areas where that's not wrong. Like wrong.
Yeah.
Those guys are winning you championships right now. And I'm going to talk.
It's amazing.
I'm pulling up Keep Trade Cut right now. As far as their dynasty rankings, and right now, as far as overall, Bijan was going 101. Right now, he is going 12th overall in startups. So he's held his
tail
ground.
End of the first round.
He's in that tail end of the first. Jahmyr Gibbs was falling to 104, 105. At this point, he is going at pick 209. So he's now become a second round startup pick. Devon Achane is now going. Now I was taking him everywhere at 111.
Much later.
I took him
that's right.
all over the place. And now he is going at pick 32 overall in startups. So 208. You look at some of these other guys. I mean, you look at CJ Stroud right now is going at this point, he is going in the first round. He is like
easy
pick 5, pick 6.
Yeah.
And as I pull up the rest of these, I mean, what we really started to do was we started to discount the class. I mean, right now Stroud is 105. Bijan is 112. Anthony Richardson is 203. Jahmyr Gibbs is 208. You keep going down. I mean, and there's still more guys. I mean, Puka is in the early third round. Achane's in the third round. Jordan Addison's in the third round. Tank Dell, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. I mean, it goes on and on and on. You go to the fourth round and you got Zay Flowers. I mean, if you invested in this class, you paid out huge dividends unless you took maybe Bryce Young, who's fallen off, and I'm not ready to cancel him out.
Not writing him off quite yet, right? Quentin Johnston, maybe.
Exactly. Those are the only two guys in the first round. Maybe Zach Charbonnet, if you stretch for him at the 11 or 12,
that's fair.
that have not gained value. And John, every year we try to think about it further. Everyone says, oh, well, let's move into next year. Every single one of these guys almost, 10 out of 12 gained value, and some of them significant value. And I think
held value. Absolutely.
Looking into next year's class, I mean, you have some tiers. Let's talk about that right now. I mean, like your top tier with obviously Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison. Those guys got to be round 1, round 2 startup picks.
They're in that range. Yeah.
May and Bowers, we're saying maybe 3rd, 4th round.
Yeah, I think that if you start to look at this far in advance, and again, we have the whole off season to look at all the analytics, break down the film, bring on some people smarter than us that have been doing this for longer than us to talk about this. But kind of, let's say, vibes-based tiers and rankings. I'm joking a little bit because I actually have watched an incredible amount of film on college football this season. But I think that top tier, if you're just talking super flex leagues, it's Stroud. Overall, I think it's got to be 1. If you're looking at 23 and 24 classes, I think Caleb Williams is right behind him. And then I'm going to go and just put Anthony Richardson at the bottom part of that tier. Yeah, those 3 guys.
What he did in these games that he finished, he finished as QB4 and QB1, and I mean, Stroud's just been phenomenal. And it just goes further to the story of when we were doing this in February last year, Stroud was my 1, and that was the guy where a lot of people were knocking that. Richardson started to become part of that equation, but it's like you can never start this too soon, and I want to ask you the difference between 23 and 24 basically is like, do you see 24 having a similar type where it's like there's a heavy guys 1 through 10 and the second round's going to be loaded again? I mean, where do you see this 24 class? Because a lot of people right now, John, they're like, you know what? I could trade the 108 and really potentially go all in. Or there's some other people that say, hey, I have the 102 right now, but somebody offered me Tyreek Hill for him. I mean, like, do I go all in and try to win it knowing that that's going to be Marvin Harrison Jr.?
Yeah, exactly. I think that you want to try to get right now this far out into those top 6 picks of the 24 class. And I could kind of break it down. I mean, we just talked about those first 3 QBs. The next tier I've got is Marvin Harrison Jr. and Bijan. They're both the clear overall positional leader of their class, I think. Bijan, like you said, has held values kind of the tail end of the first round of startups, maybe dips into the early second. I think that's where we might see Marvin Harrison Jr. go. Right now, all we need to see is where he lands. I think he is the most talented wide receiver we've seen over the past number of classes. But if you look at the other top dynasty wide receivers in the league, Jefferson, Chase, AJ Brown, CeeDee Lamb, right? These guys are all paired up with dynamic QBs in offenses that are going to get them the ball. We kind of have to convince ourselves if we're going to put Marvin Harrison Jr. in that type of range of the top 5 dynasty wide receiver, we need to see where he goes, what system, what QB, what coach, right? But right now,
crossed that Atlanta just doesn't take him to. They don't want to ruin another guy.
I mean, don't send him to. I mean, let's avoid the Patriots and the Giants too. We can toss those two in. But I think that's the next tier I've got, and you're going to need the 102 to be safe, probably to get Marvin Harrison Jr. He could go maybe 103 possibly, but. Just to answer your question, right? Because we've been talking about this top 4 for a while with Caleb, Marvin Harrison Jr., Drake May, and Brock Bowers. I think there's 2 more now that are must-have players coming out of the 24 class, and it's Jaden Daniels and Malik Neighbors, both out of LSU. I actually think that Jaden Daniels should and probably will win the Heisman Trophy this year. I had to tell you, like when I first published 24 rankings, I was too low on him. I am blown away by what he's done this year. True dual threat.
Is this kind of like Anthony Richardson?
It is
initially
exactly what it's like.
We're way behind. It was always Stroud and Young, and then all of a sudden we were like Richardson. Let's see some tape, and then it's like, ooh, wow, and then we get closer and closer to it, and he could put himself in that super flex area up in above.
I really think when the dust settles, kind of like we saw with Anthony Richardson, you're spot on. I think that he could be drafted as high as 102. What are we waiting to see though? Got to see where he lands. Draft capital, is he a top 10 pick? That's the first thing I'm looking for. And then the second is what team, what does the coaching staff look like? I think we've talked a lot about on the pod that landing spot for QBs is very important. We've seen it kind of work against other QBs. Talk about Trey Lance and Zach Wilson. Pour out a couple for those guys. But I think that Jaden Daniels could get in that conversation. I mean, I think that Drake May is there too, but this is fantasy football, right? The thing that could propel Jaden Daniels up there, like we saw with Richardson, is the rushing capability. Seriously, go watch some highlights of this guy. I know it's not all about the highlights. You got to look at their strengths and weaknesses, but he looks like Lamar Jackson out there, and he's actually got a bigger frame than some of the other big rushers like a Kyler out there. So we might find ourselves this time next year talking about Jaden Daniels as a prized prospect. But also, I gotta talk about Malik Neighbors for a second. I know I'm geeking out here, but this guy, Malik Neighbors, I'm not ready to put him in the same tier as Marvin Harrison, but he's pretty dang close. He's actually put up better production than Harrison Jr. this year. Harrison was a finalist, one of the 4 finalists for the Heisman. Malik Neighbors, as crazy as this sounds, could win the Biletnikoff.
Yeah, and I think in this class, in 23, he's the wide receiver 1.
He's the wide receiver 1, exactly. I posted this out there, and I'm giving all the props in the world to JSN and Addison, and even Puka now, right? And I liked a lot of the previous class, but he just is that much better. In fact, he may be the wide receiver 1 in most classes. It sounds like hype, but I have watched a lot in this guy. The thing that really is incredible about him, he's got that perfect size. He can play really all over the formation, so you can move him around, play him in the slot. He can line up out wide. He makes you miss in the field. He can beat you deep. He's just one of those guys that can just burn the defense in so many different ways. And his production this year is bananas, what he's doing. So he's, to me, those top 6 guys, again, Caleb, Harrison, May, Bowers, Neighbors, and Daniels, those are the picks that I'm really willing to pay up for. I do think, there's going to be a solid second half of the first round. There's going to be some guys that surprise us too, right?
I think that's what really is going to throw some people off. Once we get to the offseason, they're going to say that, oh, well, it's only this, that, the other thing. You know what I mean? Like, I think they're going to say it falls off. But I mean, you got Ibukwa in there, Worthy, Keon Coleman, Travion Henderson,
wide receivers especially loaded.
Now that's the part that's a bit of a pitfall, right? Because they're going to say, oh, well, look at the 2023 class. None of them are elite in that area, right? Like, but this is a different class. We're not heavy on the running backs, like everyone just wants to point out, oh, once we get to 2024, and you and I have really pointed this out the last 2 years. They're like, oh, well, in 2024, we're going to start talking about 2025, and it's like, let's zone in on what we have here. And this year's class, the other thing that I thought before we move on to the second rounders and stuff like that is, I had Neighbors back. We did these rankings like way back in like 2 months ago. I had Neighbors as my 4, and you've always had Bowers as your 4. And for me, I think a tight end starts to move back a little bit, especially as he is.
I'm with you.
In the updated class from Keep Trade Cut, I mean, they have it. Stroud would, if we did it right now, Stroud would be 1, Bijan would be 2, Richardson would be 3, Gibbs 4, and Laporta moves all the way up to 5. And it's like,
maybe Kincaid somewhere in there too now. Yeah.
They have it as Puka 6, A-Chain 7, Addison 8, Dell 9, JSN 10, Kincaid 11. It's mind-blowing to me that Kincaid moved backward.
I have a hard time with that one.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And then they have Flowers at 12, which is like, dude, if you invested in this class, you are paying dividends. I have to look at what I've seen from Sam Laporta, what I've seen from Dalton Kincaid, who I own in almost every league, being that Buffalo guy, being that tight end that you and I said is a Kelsey Light kind of thing. It's like these two guys have reinvented it, where it's like it's going to be hard for Bowers to crack into that area, knowing that Kincaid went first round to the Bills. What is that landing spot where Bowers has that same kind of return, and that's a question people have been asking in the Patreon is like, how high up do you take a tight end based off of where's his situation? Like there's that dream scenario. You've said before, Bowers is slightly better than these two guys, in your opinion, coming out.
From a talent perspective, I think you can make that argument, but you do have to factor in draft capital and landing spot. So right now, I put Bowers, Kincaid, and Laporta all in the same tier. And look, I mean, you got to look a little bit further down the road. Is Stephon Diggs going to stay in Buffalo? I mean, next year, sure. Yeah, I think so. But beyond that, I don't know. There's a scenario where Kincaid could turn into, like a Travis Kelce light, Josh Allen's favorite target in the Buffalo offense. Yes, please. Whereas Laporta is never going to be passing up Amon-Ra St. Brown. And I actually think Jameson Williams is going to come on a little further, right? There's a few more mouths to feed. I don't know. They're both in a strong position, though. So I kind of have them all valued pretty similarly right now.
The crazy thing right now, and again, we don't usually talk a lot about Keep Trade Cut. They have some great things over there. They have some other things that I'm not wild on, but for the most part, their information, that they put out there right now, like Sam, it's pretty accurate when it comes to dynasty rankings and startup values. And they have Sam Laporta as a back end second rounder, as the tight end
premium. I get it. Yeah.
Hawkinson at 29, which is 306, but then Kincaid all the way out down at 44. And you can't sell me that Laporta is that much better than Kincaid. It's like those guys. Kincaid's definitely a buy. We'll talk about that all off season. But like, I'm giddy to talk about the 23 classes because we were right. We were right.
These guys were special.
We said Quentin Johnston was the biggest boom bust out of the entire thing. Bryce Young was probably the only one that we were not in on, or were in on and shouldn't have been.
He went number one overall. It's like everybody was there on.
Exactly. And it's like, but I think the opportunity is still there for him, to kind of move into that area. What I want to hone in right now is talk about the second rounders, because I saw a lot of people trading second round picks lately. They're trying to trade a second round pick for James Conner. They're trying to trade a second round pick, for Jaylen Warren. They're trading these second round picks. And, if we did this 2 years ago, last year you missed out on, in the second round, Sam Laporta. You missed out on a lot of drafts. A-Chain fell in the second. Tank Dell. You missed out on Rashee Rice, who right now, I mean, Rashee Rice's numbers have been fantastic. Like
Mm-hmm.
he's been ascending into the right offense. You missed out on Jaden Reed in the late second, early third. You missed out on Josh Downs. I mean, these guys.
Puka Nacua was going even later. Yeah.
I was leaving him because he was going third, fourth
he was
round.
Going third, fourth. Yeah.
You know, Michael Mayer's still, Luke Musgrave. We haven't even scratched the surface on some of these guys. I mean, some of the running backs like Kendre Miller, Jonathan Mingo started to come on a little bit at wide receiver. Tank Bigsby's out of the equation. But the second rounder, I mean, if you drafted in the second round this year, your hit rate was still, I mean, John, it was probably 60% or 70%
really nice
compared to years in the past. So it's like, what I got to ask is this class going to be as deep? Because right now I see a lot of people trading seconds. I see a lot of people trading late firsts. You know, if I'm in a playoff scenario, I'm trying to insulate backwards. You know, like I had an opportunity to trade my 24 first in a league where I lost Mark Andrews, but instead of doing that, I traded Breece Hall and Mark Andrews to get TJ Hawkinson, Isaiah Pacheco, and a first on my end. You know, it's like I'm starting to think a little bit differently about making those trades, trading those 24 firsts, because so many of them I traded my 23 firsts and I missed out on A-Chain. I missed out on, you know, Kincaid. I missed out on some of these guys. And I'm like, man, like that was a first, but now it's worth so much more.
Yeah, I feel you. And I think that the reality is we're getting to a point in the season where it's going to be harder to get those first round picks. People are starting to realize how valuable these things are. I mean, a lot of them are listening to our pod and a lot of other great pods out there. So the seconds are really valuable pick that aren't going to cost quite as much. And we talked a lot about it, but if you're a contender, one thing you can do is consider parting with maybe your 24 first, but get someone else's 24 second back in return that may only be a few spots down, but it's the optic of moving from a first to a second. So getting that second tossed in, or just try to get seconds packaged in any move you're making and, you know, flip them for more. They're guaranteed to gain in value. So that's the thing you got to know.
That's what I've been doing. Even on my rebuilding teams, I'm like, oh, you want this premium asset for the playoffs? Then you give me your second and I'll give you my third to close it up, you know? And if that guy wins the playoffs, okay, it's 212. I move up 2 spots. If he doesn't, it's the 206. And the 206 last year was right in that area of taking a Sam Laporta, you know? And I think the more we do this, it's like, let's rethink outside the box a little bit. Like I made that trade and some of the guys in there like, yo, Dad doesn't do that. Why is he trading Breece Hall? I love Breece Hall, except he's doing nothing for me right now, right? Like he is in a spot where, sorry, we got a little technical difficulty. He is doing nothing for me where I bought Isaiah Pacheco in a first and then got myself a tight end in TJ Hawkinson. Now I'm ready to go. I mean, I'm in an undefeated season, but I'm also making trades for the future. You don't have to sell it all in just because you're in that spot. You don't have to say, okay, I have the 101 next year. Might as well go buy Tyreek Hill. You know, like that's the thinking that I'm trying to get away with. I'm trying to get away from, all right, I'll buy those picks later. You know, I'll get them back later. You know, how do you manage that, John? Because I know you're all in, you know, and in Smash One, you don't have a pick until maybe 2 presidential candidates from now. You know what I mean? So like, how do you go about, you know, thinking that way? Like, do you push in? Do you hold out? You know, that it's a tough thing to gauge back and forth.
You know, it is. I mean, it's kind of like this endless cycle. Like, how long can you continue contending? In Smash One, humble brag, did manage to win year 1 and year 2, which was my goal. But I have fallen off a little bit because
I'm a little worried, man. I got that round 1 bye, and because I'm the 2 seed, I might have to play you round 1.
Yeah, I might surprise. I felt like let's give it one more shot. I am defending the title. I'm holding the trophy. But the reality is, I had to overpay for some of those contending assets, just like we talked about. Some of them during the playoffs. I made some moves, and maybe 1 or 2 too many, to be honest with you. When you go all in, you go all in. I didn't leave any chips in front of me. But
we don't play top 3.
Yeah, that's just it. That's just the way I roll. But here's the thing. At some point, I will have to start rebuilding, and I have a lot of assets that I can trade for picks. Like, for example, Josh Allen on my team right now, he's still worth what, 3 or 4 firsts.
That's right? The biggest thing we talk about is like in Superflex, Allen, Mahomes, you know, Herbert, Jalen Hurts,
Yeah.
having
You
those
gotta have
top
one of those guys.
5 or 6
Yes.
quarterbacks are not only the most sound investment, but when you are, people are like, oh, dad, like you're in Smash 9, I have Tyreek Hill, Keenan Allen, Joe Mixon. I got old heads, but I got Lamar Jackson and Justin Fields where I'm like, all right, when this starts to fall apart, I have 2 quarterbacks that I can blow this thing up.
That's it.
And fix it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, you can go find a couple of other contenders, right? Whether it's like someone like your team or someone else, and just say, look, I can turn you into the favorite this season.
Yeah.
But let me get some of your younger assets in return, or some of the picks in return. And you start flipping stuff like that. And it's actually kind of fun to rebuild, right? I mean, you just go through these cycles.
Spotify, that is our on the rap thing. That is still our most
formula,
listened to episode is the Smash Accept Rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, and this blew my mind, you start to look at it, there were over 200 text messages sent as somebody sharing that podcast.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean?
That's impressive.
Like most of them were me sending them to my mom and dad, but like, that's a cool thing, right? Like, you're trying to rebuild. Listen to what the guys at Smash Accept are doing. There's this, we've become known like that. If you want to rebuild,
no doubt.
we're
Splash
the people
trades,
to do
baby.
it. And that's something where if you guys messed it up, if you guys did a startup, if you guys did those things, like you're gonna want to join the Patreon. We break it down. We'll fix the entire.
We've done it before, right? When you're OGs like us, it's kind of like
Smash One. I went
there, done that.
I went from last year 0-13 to this year as of right now 11-1. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, impressive.
A couple of things here and there, fell into place properly.
Yeah, just don't be a mid, right? Just get yourself out of that.
Nobody likes
middle
mids.
Of the pack.
Yeah,
get out of here.
Nobody likes the mids. No, but I mean, this is an exciting time. I think that's some great information. Is like, I just, if I'm pushing the chips in, I'm trying right now to buy guys cheaper that are veterans, and I'm also, if I'm buying someone, like. I when I lost Mark Andrews everywhere, I'm not going for Kelsey as much as I am Kincaid or Laporta, or trying to add a little bit and going that way if you can, or if I'm making a move where I'm moving off Jonathan Taylor because he's hurt, then I'm gonna try to get an insulated trade where I'm gonna get Josh Jacobs in a first, or I'm gonna get Joe Mixon in a first, as opposed to. There aren't that many running backs.
Zach Moss, like his backup, dude, for pretty cheap, right?
Zach Moss for a late second is a smash. That's one where people aren't willing to pay that. I think he ends up winning you a championship. Like he gets into that area. This is just I can't wait to start talking about diamonds in the rough as I start looking at rankings, seeing Kyren Williams coming out of nowhere here as the RB2 overall in points per game. And I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about him, because people are saying, John, he's valued at 24 first now. Like I'm looking at it on Keep Trade Cut. I'm looking at a Dynasty Trade Calculator. I'm looking at trades in our league. And when he got hurt, I told everybody to pay a second. Is he worth a first now? Like, is this an area where a 23-year-old running back who is now RB2 overall in points per game and RB12, he has more fantasy points than Bijan Robinson in half a season. And that's just, there's no way you would say, okay, he's going to have more yards per carry than Bijan Robinson. He's going to have more more touchdowns. Like he's going to have more explosive plays. And you're like, yeah, okay, Dad. But he's there.
I mean, if you're contending and you want him, it's probably going to cost you a late first. I'd be surprised if you could get him for early second. I'd try to hold on to the first and look for another way to pick up Kyren Williams, but you want him. And I think that he could be a critical piece to help you win a ship. Now, can he sustain this? This is dynasty into next year. I don't know. I mean, he could be like this year's Jamal Williams, where, I mean, the touchdowns that he's got, might see some regression, might not be able to sustain it. But that offense, that Rams offense, man, it's just set up for a couple of things. Like Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are always open, and you're just going to hand it off to your RB1 in the red zone and just pile up those touchdowns. And so, I mean, if you can get him for anything less than a late first, I think it's a smash. But consider doing it, right? Maybe you could find somebody that got knocked out of the playoffs and they have Kyron Williams. They don't want him for next year. Pick him up for a little cheaper that way, right? So there's a lot of ways you can approach it.
I've moved Bijan. Bijan stayed my RB1. I've moved Gibbs to my RB2 overall, and I have McCaffrey at 3, and that's the ultimate like win now piece. But John, you look at Bijan Robinson's the RB13 on the season. Jahmyr Gibbs is the RB15, and it almost does just see when you see the potential, you see the draft capital, and you just see the flash. Those aren't great seasons, like they're having good seasons. They're back end RB1, early RB2s, but their draft stock is still round 1, round 2.
Yeah.
And I think that really is something that we need to look at is like these draft picks, they're going to hold their value, even if the guys aren't totally popping off. And I think 24, I think TreVeyon Henderson has an opportunity to be, someone that enters one of those top 12 dynasty running back positions as well.
I do think so. And I think if a lot of my like contending championship type rosters have running backs on their rookie contracts, they just get heavily utilized. Maybe not their rookie season, but year 2, year 3, year 4. And even look at someone like McCaffrey. He wasn't doing that in year 1. He popped off, but yeah, he actually has continued to get better. And someone like TreVeyon Henderson is built to put up production as an RB1 down the road. And people believe in those guys, even if they didn't have the most incredible rookie season, because they're still guaranteed to be in the same offense for the next 4 years if they were drafted in the first round. That's super valuable in Dynasty to have a consistent young running back on your roster. So I think we're always looking for guys like that. I mean, that's why, Devin Achane to me is one of those guys too. I have him, just like I said earlier, almost at the same level as Gibbs at this stage, because that Miami offense and what he's shown, the production per game that he's put up, I want him on as many rosters as I can get right now, because he's going to be there the next 3 years with Mike McDaniel in the Dolphins. So those are the kinds of guys you're looking for. Same thing will be true next year. Yeah. There's going to be a couple running backs that do it.
He's an absolute league winner. I'm still a little worried about the size, but I'm going to ride this train. The Achane train is leaving the station to win you guys some championships. You know what I mean? The other side of that, John, is people get excited about drafting quarterbacks. They get excited about drafting the running backs in their rookie drafts. And rarely do they say, outside of Marvin Harrison, even last year, even if you were taking Jackson Smith-Njigba, you weren't like jumping out of your seat. Like we were doing that for Jamar Chase. Marvin Harrison's going to be there, but look at this year. Puka Nacua is the wide receiver 9. You have Tank Dell, the wide receiver 19, but over the last month has been top 5. Jordan Addison, wide receiver 20. Certain stretches when Kirk Cousins was playing, he was a wide receiver 1. He was a wide receiver, I think, at his peak up to wide receiver 11 overall. Zay Flowers is a wide receiver, 3, but he's had some ebbs and flows, but has maintained his value. Rashee Rice, wide receiver 33. Guys like Jaden Reed, wide receiver 36. Wide receiver 3s have value. Downs at 42. And then, you really got to go down. Jackson Smith-Njigba, who's come on of late, is at 49. But these guys, for their dynasty values, haven't dipped. You look at where they're going, and it hasn't fallen off that far.
Yeah, these wide receivers really are super stable assets in Dynasty. That's really what you want in many ways to build your team around. I think you do want to have the superstar QB like we talked about. It helps to have a couple of QB1s if you can build your roster that way. We talked about having young running backs, but maybe they're not as sexy, but wide receivers are going to have more longevity in the NFL. They're going to definitely get re-signed after that rookie contract for putting up production. We know that. So these guys are just super valuable. And we talked about second round rookie picks. Next year, you might be getting guys like Xavier Worthy out of Texas or Troy Franklin out of Oregon. I'm looking at guys like maybe Rome Odunze out of Washington, or his teammates Jalen Polk and Jalen McMillan out of Washington. Go watch the college football players and watch these guys. Brian Thomas Jr. out of LSU, Xavier Legette out of South Carolina, Tez Walker from UNC. Like, I can keep going and going. There's going to be these wide receivers next year that'll go in the second round of rookie drafts that are going to do exactly what we're seeing this year. They're going to be there. So again, be careful about trading those seconds, or try to pick up a few more and land some of these stable wide receiver assets to your roster next year.
And first round picks just hold so much value. Jordan Addison right now on Keep Trade Cut is the wide receiver 13 going in the third round of startups. Dell, at wide receiver 14, JSN, wide receiver 15. Johnny, he's the wide receiver 49. He hasn't been impressive, but he's still maintaining that value because he's just doing just enough.
Yeah.
Zay Flowers is the wide receiver 20, and I think you look at what those things are, and outside of Quentin Johnston, they've held their value. They've put themselves in. Quentin Johnston had a better game last week, and I think he might take a little bit longer to come along, but I think there's just some things there that we got to look at, where I've always been like, this time of year, I had a guy message me on Twitter. He's like, don't listen, dad says, if you have your first and you're in the playoffs, you're not playing dynasty right now. I don't think that's actually true. Like, there was a time where I'm like, okay, I got a first sitting in my pocket. I'm going to go trade it for Kamara, even though I don't need him. There was a time there. And now I'm like, okay,
shifted a little.
Let's find a different mentality. Let's find a different way to get them. If there is right now, let's talk about a couple quick hitters of guys that, John, you have a first or a second. What's a veteran you have to buy? These guys, I'm always scouring. I spent like 2 hours today just scrolling through
trade targets.
And for me, like right now, my number one buy, he's got the number one strength of schedule for the running backs the rest of season. And right now he is sitting, I think he's moved into, hold on a second, into the wide RB10 on the season is Isaiah Pacheco. Isaiah Pacheco is coming off back-to-back 20-plus point performances. He gets the easiest running back schedule, and I'm willing to pay, a 25 first or what would be a 111 or 112, because everybody says, well, he doesn't have the contract, he doesn't have the draft capital. Isaiah Pacheco, I look at in a similar fashion as I do Brock Purdy, right? They don't have the draft capital, but man, do they have the confidence of their coach? They've moved into an area where it's like, these guys are going to ball out. I think Isaiah Pacheco is way, way undervalued for what he could put on your team over these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, if I could rattle off a few, I threw one out in a pod we did recently, but I said, as you probably remember, spicy take that I thought Dak Prescott would be a top 5 rest of the season. What have we seen so far? Absolutely top 5. I think he can maintain that. It's going to be harder to get him now, but if you'd listened, a few weeks ago.
Here's the tricky part. Like, I'm trying to get Dak everywhere, and I'm willing to, at this point, scale off of a Burrow or a Herbert to get the. I'm going to get some pluses on there, but Dak Prescott is not going to fall off the face of the earth like he did this year, where everybody's like, dropped him all the way down to QB 18. Like, what was that all about? Like, that don't make any sense.
Overreaction.
For sure.
Right. That's kind of the guy that I've loved. I think for some reason, Brock Purdy and Sam Howell are still pretty cheap to get if you can get those guys. Running back though, I love the Pacheco one. I think he's top 10 rest of season. We talked about Kyron Williams. I think Kyron Williams is top 5 rest of season potentially. Yeah. I think, just a couple of the guys we talked about, Zach Moss as a nice RB2 type guy, rest of season. For whatever reason, Rachaad White is actually still cheaper than like the production he's putting up.
Well, it's like that. No one's excited about it, right? Like, no one's ever been like, I got Rachaad White. I almost went.
He's like Tyler Lockett. It's like, but put up like really good numbers again. But
he's the most inefficient running back between the tackles. But that's not all we play about. We talk about the receptions, and that's what he does.
And touchdowns.
And right now, he is the RB5 with 51 receptions. That's absurd.
But you're not having to pay like that kind of price to get him. Is kind of the point. So just put some offers out. We talked a lot about Keenan Allen. Absolutely remains like one of our top overall and I think vets to target, right?
Keenan's the way, right? So what I'm trying to do is you look at the guy that has Alvin Kamara, Keenan Allen, and Travis Kelce. I think are the 3 names where I'm like, if they're in the playoffs, maybe even Derrick Henry. So let's say, if for instance in Smash 1, if you lose week 1 of the playoffs and I got to buy and I'm sitting there, you better believe I'm coming after those kind of guys. I'm going after a Travis
No
Kelce.
doubt.
I'm going after, a Alvin Kamara. Like, if you can't get them now, there's no rush. If that guy loses in the playoffs, make that move. If you can get it there right now, where I made a trade today, Ramondre Stevenson straight up for Alvin Kamara. I don't care if Ramondre Stevenson's younger. I don't care. Alvin Kamara is going to win you a championship. He's RB4.
It's the all-in way.
Not in points per game, but on the overall season, despite missing all that time. I mean, we've done those things where we've talked about Kamara, we've talked about Dak, we've talked about Mixon, some of these guys where, oh, by the way, Joe Mixon's RB6 on the year again, where nobody wanted him.
How about, like, could you go out and get Michael Pittman or Nico Collins, wide receiver? Like, with
I think
Tank Dell out of the picture?
The Nico price just went through the roof.
Yeah, I guess it is a little late to go get him. Yeah.
The modern day Tyler Boyd, Mr. Noah Brown himself, is now a guy that moves into that area where,
I've got Noah Brown so many teams.
So cheap. You just move him in there. If you can trade for a guy, Trey McBride keeps ascending, but he is Kyler Murray's love affair. That's someone that you go in
it's
there.
It's like a buy high though, right? Trey McBride, buy high on that guy.
He's just going to keep going, and I think Mike Evans is a perfect example. Like,
oh yes, Mike
right
Evans.
now, number 2 in the league in 20+ yard explosive plays, always top 5 in touchdown production with 10 of them right now. Like, he's just incredible. Pittman was a great one. I think Adam Thielen started to drop off a little bit. Devontae Adams is still too cheap. Cortland Sutton is incredibly cheap and has a nice schedule down the back
Brandon
half.
Ayuk's another guy.
We're just looking at these things where it's like, right now, you are not doing dynasty right if you don't just go look and say, this is who this guy has, right? You got to put yourself in that. You and I do a lot with sales, and you got to be like, what does this guy need, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
A good salesman doesn't say, what can I push on this guy? A good salesman is like, how can I benefit this guy so we can benefit? Yeah, exactly. And like, I think the more you guys listen to the podcast, the more you guys figure out that mentality. That's how John and I have been successful is it's not just like, hey, you know what? I have player X and he's garbage. Give me player Y and he's good. That's your redraft guys from work.
I'm feeling that.
You get those trade offers.
I work in the tech industry in like a international sales position. Most of our conversations start with your pain points, the customers' challenges that they face. You don't go in there and start pitching your stuff and all the features and benefits. You listen to them first, and then you say, I've got something to help solve those problems. Let's talk about it, right? So that's the same thing here. I mean, I love what you're saying. Put stuff out there that's going to appeal to them. If they're out of the playoff race, but they're sitting there with vets that aren't really going to help them, they want to get younger, you can offer them that, and then you get your contending asset in return. Or the opposite of that, right? You want to kind of get younger and some rookie picks. So you're just going to go look at the 5-6 playoff team contenders and appeal to them with some contending assets in exchange for picks, right?
Those are the guys right now, right? So I was looking in all the Smash leagues, there's only one of them that's 1 through 6 are already set. There's just one across all 12. But there's a couple of them where there's 3 or 4 guys vying for those final
1 week
spots.
left.
Slot 5 is open and slot 6 for max points. And those guys are like, those guys are actively going after it. Target those guys because those guys, those are the guys first you want, right? Because that guy who's the 7 seed, all of a sudden he loses this week and drops down. Now all of a sudden you just went and you got Brock Bowers put on your team and you traded him Evan Ingram in a third. You know what I mean? Like you make those kind of moves and you push towards them. You appeal towards their side, like, hey, you need to win this week.
Yeah, those injured players on the contending rosters. Hey, Ramondre's not helping you right now. JT, Tank Dell, those guys can't help you at this stage. I will give you an offer for those for a guy that is healthy and can replace those points on your roster, right? That's absolutely something you should be considering. And I have to say, even in some of the Smash leagues, I put some offers out like that. And sometimes you get a response like, no, I think I'm good. It's like, again, don't be a mid. Right. Don't settle for being middle of the pack. You got to go for it. Right. That's just my mindset. I mean, it's not for everybody, but
all in playoff, John, all in or all out, baby. Yeah. This was a fun one. I'm excited for playoffs. I'm excited to,
yes, sir.
It's been such a grind. I'm excited to get through the playoffs. and get to next year's content, but I want to enjoy it. And that's one thing that, like, John, I know, you and I in the past have just even called each other and be like, yo, it's playoff weekend. Am I overthinking this guy?
Right.
Should I be starting that guy? And that's something that's huge in the Patreon as part of a community. You're answering each other's questions, but you have access to us as well. Whereas, like, you know what? You got to make this decision between Noah Brown and Josh Downs this week. That feels like that's a tough choice. Who do you want this week, John? Who's this guy? You know what I mean? And like, those are things that we can help you get through, where the sense of community there is worth that cup of coffee a month, honestly, just to pitch ideas off of other guys in there. And that's been the fun thing. And I think that's, for me, starting this up was almost like the podcast. I wanted it to be like what you and I talk about when we're on the phone. Like, we were like, let's just record this. And
exactly.
The Patreon, I wanted to be like, what do you and I text about? You know what I mean? And it's just become that, and that's exciting. And, I encourage as many of you guys to get involved with that, because it's just a fun time right now.
For day one, that's what it always was about for us, is just having a lot of fun and helping build the community, right? And now, kind of looking back, we have been able to do a lot of that because of that level of focus that we had on the listeners, on the community. And, we're having fun learning a lot too, right? Humbly speaking, we're always learning some new ways to get better. That's what you want to be doing in life in general, right? But definitely do it in Dynasty Fantasy Football. That's what it's about at Smash Accept.
We did the whole nostalgia thing before episode 200. Episode 200 is coming up. That's a milestone for us.
Yeah.
A lot of you guys in the Patreon are not, like, if Smash Accept has been important to you in your fantasy journey, your dynasty journey, send us a text, send us most of you don't have our numbers, but send us a DM, send us something in the Patreon. If you guys want to do, a 30-second, video, you want to do an audio, you just want to say something, to get it out there on the podcast. Like, we really appreciate those kind of things, especially if it's, is it a nipple piercing or are we getting you out of the playoffs? So Smash Accept, always trying to get you guys out of nipple piercings, and here to help you enjoy the process, baby.
Yeah. How could I say it any better?